banking ahead. Konechny tips it. He got it past the defenseman and gets to the puck. Konechny cutting it on goal. He scored! A beauty from Konechny, and the Flyers take a 1-0 lead. Beat the defenseman, then beat the goaltender. And Konechny's third goal in the last two games has the Flyers on top.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 196, brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. The Flyers have started their rookie camp. The veterans report this Thursday as main training camp begins, and the excitement is in the air. Michcov is actually playing in Russia. He's getting some time. We'll talk a little bit about that. Everybody's getting upset about Fedotov, but the Russians don't care. Might have a mention or two about that. But the main concentration tonight is getting you ready for the vets are back. We want to find out what's going on with Coots, what some of these kids at 5 or 6 players that are vying for spots on the team. We'll get into all of that with our special guest, Bill Meltzer. But I just want to hit the panel real fast. The great Dan Silver was just recovering from something, so he was able to make a previous engagement. He won't be with us tonight, but as always, with me to my left, it is Chef B. How are you, my friend?
Good. We got a taste of hockey over the weekend there, and just glad it's back. I'm looking forward to the having a fun season with the boys, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So tonight we're going to have Bill Meltzer from the Flyers, main writer for Flyers.nhl.com, is on Hockey Buzz. You're with Flyers Alumni Association. You got a new project coming up?
I helped Joe Watson write his autobiography. That is done, and we'll have copies in hand in October. So there will be copies for sale online this fall, and then they'll be in bookstores by early next year.
Nice.
Fantastic. So yeah, I guess, a guy as laconic as Joe, it must have really been tough getting stories out of him because, he's a man of very few words, right?
Besides Joe having endless stories, every city, every occasion, every season, every person, Joe has stories about. Joe has these scrapbooks that are about 15 pounds a piece. And so if there's any game, anything you need to research, it was already there. It was the easiest research I've ever had to do in a book, and the hardest part is picking what not to include in there. So,
fantastic. We'll definitely look for that, and check Bill's timeline at Bill Meltzer on Twitter. I'm sure you'll be featuring that, and you're gonna have book signings and all kinds of stuff. And Joe's about as good as an ambassador for the Flyers or history as anybody in the team's history.
He sure is, and Joe is 80 years old, and I hope I have a memory 1/10 as good as Joe's when I'm 80 years old, because Joe remembers everything. So
he's one of a kind. He really is.
He is. There's only one Joe Watson.
Yeah, and he was such a character back in the day. And you know what? He's like you said, he's sharp. He's the same guy. It's really something. So, Bill, the Flyers rookies are in camp. They had a couple games over the weekend. They dropped a couple contests to the Rangers rookies. We're not white knuckling this. This is not the end of the world. But we were looking at some players to kind of put a red line in the sand and mark their territory as guys that should be looked at, that have more of a future with the parent club. And maybe that didn't happen as much for most of these players. Maybe some general comments about, those games and general impressions.
Yeah, I think that to whatever extent there was disappointment, it was that Tyson Forster and Elliot Denye and Bobby Brink didn't make that big statement game, ahead of the main camp. But by the same token, we've seen Forster in previous camps. Last year the Flyers swept the back-to-back games, and Forster was dominating. And I remember he had the overtime winner in the first one and all kinds of scoring chances in the second one. So sometimes it just happens that way. You want it to happen, and just it doesn't fall that way. One of the things that was impressed upon me, and you can tell it in the building, is how much team speed they've added in the organization. Between guys like Denver Barkey and Samu Tuamala, Alexei Gendron with a breakaway in the second game.
Chernik, maybe.
Yeah, and Chernik too. Chernik is the fourth name. Scored in the first game. All these guys can absolutely fly. They're not the biggest guys, and sometimes you trade off a little bit of size for speed. But how many years have we been saying that they need more speed in the organization? They have that now. And there's some big guys too, like Cutter Gauthier, who was not there because of college, because of the college semester. So I like the mix of prospects. I would really like to see them develop a real number one kind of defenseman. I don't think that's in the system quite yet, but there are still some intriguing defensemen who are there. Oliver Bonk, Emil Andre. I think they're going to be good NHL players. Are they going to be Norris Trophy candidates, number one defenseman? Probably not, but good players. Yeah. And they're pretty deep in goal in terms of goaltending prospects. Neither of the two top immediate goalie prospects who were there this year, but Carson Bjarnason was there. He was Flyers traded up into the second round to be able to draft him this year. He started the second game. Started like you'd expect an 18-year-old to start in one of those games, a little shaky, a little nervous, and then he settled in as it went along. Meanwhile, probably the two top prospects, the goalies prospects in the system, Samuel Ursid will be in the main camp, and the Russian kid Alexei Kolosov, he's a starter in the KHL, and he'll be over next year. So, in terms of the state of the system, which is really more important than the outcome of a rookie's game, they're coming along actually, and it looks pretty promising.
Yeah, Chef.
Yeah, I was down at when they started camp. I popped in for a while, and I was looking at. I took some notes, but I was just wondering if you thought, out of the people we had mentioned earlier, did anybody just during the camp here or any of the two games, did any of them stand out? Like the ones we expect, I should say. I guess Emil Andre comes to mind. He kind of got. It's not like I guess defensemen kind of like offensive line in football, where you go, if you don't hear their name, they're doing all right. But in this case, when you're trying to make the team outright or at least make a good impression, I'm not saying he played bad. I'm just saying I didn't really notice him like I thought I was going to.
Yeah, and I don't think he had his A game. He only played one of the games. He only played on Saturday. I thought that he showed what a good passer he is. That they kept hitting him, because he's a little guy in terms of height anyway, and they were as physical with him as they could be. They ran him every chance they got, and he never gave an inch. Yeah. So that was a positive. One thing Andre usually does really well is put shots on net, and that wasn't working for him on Saturday. He was missing the net a lot. That's an area that's normally a strength, and I just didn't click that night. As a team, they really had trouble putting their better shot opportunities on net in that game. Really in both games to a degree, but especially in the second one. So yeah, I mean nobody just popped. There wasn't a like 1 year in the rookies game. Never forget, because it was on my birthday and I was one of the broadcasters on it. James Van Riemsdyk had 4 goals in the rookie game. It was against the Capitals. Oscar Lindblom had a hat trick. Morgan Frost had a 3-point game, in one of the rookies games. Those are the guys you look at. They jumped that night. Well, it didn't happen this year where somebody just looked like they were head and shoulders above everybody else. Yeah. But it's it's just going to happen that way. It will happen in the course of a season. There'll be just certain nights where it doesn't click for whatever reason.
Well,
Sure.
for Andre, can I just follow up? For him, he plays a lot bigger than his size. He's actually quite. The only way I can think of it is thick. I mean, he kind of is like got that small. He might be smaller in stature, but he's he's got a low center of gravity. It looks like, and he really plays a lot larger than his actual size is.
No, for sure. He likes he's not afraid to take contact. He's not afraid to initiate contact. He's, as you said, low center of gravity. He's listed, I think, at about 5'9", but he's also about 195, 198 pounds too on that. So it's hard to knock him off his feet too. He's sturdy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to make a special mention of just a couple guys. I found out today, was something I was not aware, that Matt Brown, who I'm calling this year's AHL version, this era's version of Matt Reed, maybe without the big shot, but more like an AHL version, which you would expect. He's an overage guy. He's played with Devin Kaplan at BU. And he's already in the organization as such, as a Phantom, and he's looked very good. And Zayd Wisdom, was really great to see him contribute in a way and kind of come back to where he was a couple of years ago, albeit a bigger, more mature player.
Yeah, I think Zayd was probably the most pleasant story to come out of the 2 games, because it was a tough year for Zayd last year. Tough 2 years, really, because the year before that he had a shoulder injury and he missed most of the season. Last year he had trouble finding a lineup spot regularly for the Phantoms. He ended up finishing the year in the ECHL, and so it was and still kind of is a make or break year for Zayd. The other thing too, and we'll see these in Voorhees later this week, the skating tests. Zayd was one of the guys who did not do well in the skating tests. He really struggled to complete it. He did, but it was a struggle. So he didn't have his game legs, and I think the conditioning part of it for a guy who is a complimentary player, physical, but he goes to the dirty areas and battles on the walls and all those things. At the little toughness, more than a little. I mean, he went to the biggest guy on the ice, Matt Rempe, 6'8" and 240, and dropped the gloves with him. And it went how you figured it would. He's giving up 10 inches of the guy, but he showed the moxie to even try him out. So there's never been anything wrong with Zayd's competitive level or anything like that. He's a guy you want to root for. He's a great kid, but he really did. He looked like the guy who had been with the Phantoms during when the AHL players were in the American League during COVID.
Right.
The Ontario League wasn't playing. And Zayd had some success right off the bat, and it's been kind of a little tough for him since then. So hopefully, he did take that kind of forward step.
When Zayd went after that guy, whose name escapes me, it reminded me almost like a Simmer versus Alexiak.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, obviously at a lower scale, but I would think it was like, that's what he's going for, right? Just hey, I'm back, so that was good.
Yeah, it was. And he said that's always been Zayd Wisdom. He's not afraid of anybody. That's never been a question.
Right. So moving on to like a special group of players that are younger, that have this opportunity to make the parent club. I mean, I do wonder, we can get into who in the world would they supplant. But if you look at Tyson Foster, Elliot Denoyer, Bobby Brink, Emil Andre, who we've talked about, Adam Ginning, and someone who's not really, is at this rookie camp, Ronnie Addard. These are some of the young players that are probably the most likely to bag a job and take somebody out of the lineup, even though I think for the most part, it's going to be very difficult. Like, how would you size up the Flyers roster, assuming, and this is a big assumption, that Couturier is healthy and Cam Atkinson is going to be able to stay in the lineup?
I think it's a good group of forwards. Maybe not an elite group of forwards, but it's a good group of forwards. So there's some depth to them, especially after several younger players stepped up last year. Really, to me, that was the most pleasant thing from last season. A number of younger players took a step forward last year. Now they have to pick up where they left off and keep going. Talking about the Owen Tippett's and the Noah Cates and the Morgan Frosts, who finished in a good spot last year. Now they need to pick up with that. So I think the forward group is pretty good, deeper than some might say. The defense concerns me. It's going to still be a little bit of defense by committee. That's just the reality. Provorov is not here anymore, and for whatever good or bad you might say about Ivan, Provy played 25 minutes a night, every night, and he was never injured. He was always ready to go. So, the Flyers are going to need Travis Sanheim to bounce back to that Ashby Trophy form he had season before last. They're going to need Cam York to continue to improve. They're going to need a lot of minutes out of Rasmus Ristolainen again. And he ended up having a decent year last year, but they'll need a good season out of him. They just got Sean Walker, but he's more of a third pair type. And we'll see how Stahl plays. We'll see if Zamula can crack the lineup. But none of these guys are going to be the guy who's going to go out and get you 25, 30 minutes a night. They just don't have that. And that's something the Flyers are working on long term. So that's that to me is the number one question mark that I have.
But yeah, I mean, that's definitely part of the rebuild, in search of that player. And, a first line center or a second line center could also be part of that the calculation as far as the long-term look. Chef?
Since you brought up D and over the two rookie games, I guess I was pleasantly surprised at how Yinning and Bonk played together. I thought they matched together pretty well. I like that. So if we're going to bring up those other two things, and combined with that and what we're looking at this year and maybe next year's draft, do you think that they, with what they have in the farm and what they could possibly get in a defense-heavy draft next year, that do you think that they're going to have to farm their own, number one guy, or are they going to have to go out somewhere and get it? I mean,
it's always works out best if you can develop that player yourself. Yeah. That's always kind of been the tricky part here. I mean, if you look back to the 2010s, right? I'm not going to count drafting Ghost in the third round, but in 2013, first round they draft Sam Morin. Second round they draft Robert Haig. 2014. Sanheim is a first round pick. 2015, Provorov was a first round pick. They took Cam York in the first round. Andre was a second round pick. Jennings is a second round pick. So they've used a lot of high end picks on trying to find the guys. The development side of it is always the rub here. And you don't develop defensemen overnight. Even Chris Pronger and Victor Hedman need a few years. Now they did, they had their learning curve at the NHL level.
Yeah.
But so they went right to the pro level. But it takes time. Defensemen take longer to develop than forwards in general. So there are some good defensemen in this draft coming this year. Is there a Ray Borg? Is there a Chris Pronger? I don't know. I guess over time we'll see. There was a time that Cal McCarr was just a junior A defenseman, right? And Colorado drafting him was a huge risk. I mean, to take a junior A defenseman with a 4th overall pick, you got to be certain this kid's going to make it. And they were right. They were right in his case. But you flip that around and you take a junior A defenseman and he doesn't develop the way you hope, then you get killed over it. So it's it's always, I guess ultimately the players will make you look smart or make you look dumb, but it's a process. I think the Flyers obviously want to be able to draft 20-minute a night guys for the roster moving forward. And then you round it out by making astute trades.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at who have been the best defensemen in franchise history, I mean, Mark Howe obviously is the gold standard. But also McCrimmon came in by trade, Bob Daly came in by trade, right? Desjardins came in by trade. If you're looking at who were the best homegrown defensemen in franchise history, and Provorov would have to be in that discussion because the number of names is fairly thin.
Ben Wilson, Jimmy Watson. And
Jimmy Watson.
It's the guy who had the most amount of talent out of all of them, maybe save Mark Howe, is Pickinen. And yet, he just, they just couldn't get, he wouldn't even listen to Bobby Orr, if I recall that story. So it was kind of frustrating.
And Yanni Nienema had all the talent in the world too.
So from the position of, about developing them with the new regime, the guys that are, in charge now, it looks like, from an outsider looking in, that they are doing everything in their power to make sure that the players get developed properly now. I'm not going to rehash whether or not they were before, but going forward, that looks like it's more of a priority now, correct?
For sure. And there's several pieces of development, and it's like the development guys, they're not coaching the players and systems or those kind of things. A lot of it is being a pro and the mentality of a pro, and being able to take your best games and replicate them, and to take your mistakes and learn from them. Mm-hmm. And that's what the ultimate goal is. And the other piece of it too is Philly's not an easy place to play. I know that's that stop the press is kind of news, but it's true. I mean, Philly, there's a lot of pressure, and a lot of times, particularly with defensemen, there's not a lot of patience with young defensemen. So I think just learning how to handle all that and process it all from the junior ranks all the way to the pros. And I think the reason why they brought in John LeClair and they brought in Patrick Sharp is those guys came up through the farm system, or at least in Sharp's case, and in LeClair's case, it was a player who thrived when he got here. So I think those guys understand what it's like to play in Philly, what the standards are, and also two obviously very skilled hockey players too. Yeah. I think that they have a new director of player development, a new assistant director of player development. So they certainly recognize that development has been an issue. They hired people with, either good track records or good resumes or the knowledge based in the game. And then you had to see how it comes together. But certainly that was an area that was addressed this year. And they also addressed scouting too this offseason. Yeah. Scouts are kind of the unsung heroes of an organization because they log the most miles. A lot of people don't understand what the scout's job really is, and how many, with amateur scouting, you're projecting what the guy might be in 3 years, 5 years. If he puts on 15, 20 pounds, what could he be? And then with the pro scouting side of it, which was a lot of changes this offseason, you're looking, obviously, can the guy play? But B, how does he fit in? How does his game fit in with what we need? And it might not be the same role that he's playing in another city too. They had a lot of continuity for a lot of years with the same group of pro scouts, some of whom are still there, but otherwise there was a lot of changes in there. Older scouts retired, some younger guys have come in. Mike Eastwood is now the director of pro scouting. I'm interested to see, as they make moves within the season or after the season and bringing guys in, how do these players fit in? I mean, there have been a lot of changes in hockey operations, but the ultimate proof obviously will be on the ice. Maybe not just this year, but this season and multiple seasons after that.
Sure. Did they bring in Bob Murray from Anaheim as an advisor?
They did, yeah, they did. And Murray, we were just talking about defensemen. I mean, one of the things that he did really well was identify defensemen.
Absolutely.
And I would not be the least bit surprised if that's his number one mission is find us some defensemen.
I mean, and that's the thing Jonesy talked about, right? He said they want to build a solid blue line and build from the blue line out. And it was going to be a concentration that's, for the organization to end what we've been talking about for the last few minutes, thinking about who are the best Flyers defensemen. And if you got to go back to the best homegrown guy, and it's Jimmy Watson, no offense against Jim. He was really a solid defenseman on the cup-winning teams. But compared to some of the players they brought in later, even a Count, Bob Daly, was a better player and had more impact in the game. So, yeah, you want to break that, track record and put it along the right course.
No, absolutely. And I mean, Jimmy Watson was a 5-time All-Star. Though nobody else that they've drafted has even approached that. I mean, it would be great if they could find a latter-day Jim Watson, right? Because he was a third-round pick, and a great defender, great puck mover. And in the era when there were a lot of defensemen who weren't the best of skaters, Jimmy could skate in today's game. Really that combination. He's bigger than Joe. He's several inches taller than Joe. The gold standard in today's game is you're looking for that combination of size and mobility. Sometimes some people wonder, well, what was special about Braden Coburn, as an example? Well, Kobe was a 6'5" defenseman who could skate like a 5'10" guy. Kobe had that great mobility. He was a phenomenal athlete in great condition. So he could give you 20-something minutes a night. Kobe made his share of mistakes. He might not have been a true number 2 defenseman, but he played in the league a long, long time because of his athleticism, because of the physical gifts that he had. I would love to see the Flyers be able to add that element in there of the size and athleticism, but also the head for the game too. Phil Myers had all the tools, and it just the hockey sense just didn't seem to be there. But Helge Grans, who they just got, has the athleticism.
I was just going to mention him. Yeah,
he has the size, the athleticism. We'll see if he has the head for the game. So far, it's been up and down. He had a promising first year in the AHL in the King system, and then a terrible second year. So let's see what he does this season too. But that's ultimately what I think everybody is searching for. And if the guy's right-handed, so much the better.
Yeah, it makes it easier. But I do think, and it's something we've talked about here, I think it needs to be an organizational priority to develop a certain select few left-handed guys, just because of a larger pool of left-handed defensemen. Yeah. So you don't get caught in that trap of taking someone because they're right-handed. If you have your druthers, yeah, sure, go with that guy if you can't separate two players. But don't get caught in that Bruno Gervais meets Rasmus Ristolainen trap of getting the right-handed guy, and then it's like, how we get out of this,
Yeah. And Ristolainen is also, we're talking about he's a big guy who's a pretty good skater, right-handed, but what's kept Risto from being, because remember how high he was drafted originally by Buffalo, and part of the problem, and this is the development side. They threw the kid in the NHL at 18, giving him 20 minutes a night. That it's very hard to develop a player correctly that way. Last year he simplified his game a lot rather than trying to crush everybody in the ice. He picked his spots a little bit better and was more effective too. But that's a guy who has all the physical tools to be a number one, even an impact number one defenseman, but not the hockey sense to do it. He's more of I'd say more of a number 4. Kind of a defenseman, and then a number 5 on a cup caliber team. But I mean, not that many teams are deep enough, but to be able to do that. But I mean, that's the goal though, is to get to where you can have a player who has the physical tools, maybe a little less in the hockey sense side, and you're not trying to jam square peg in round hole where the guys where you need 22, 24 minutes a night from them regularly because you don't have other options.
Right, exactly. And for good, on torch for thinking, hey, you got to stop plays first. And he got Risto to concentrate on that. It's amazing. Just something simple like that. You were talking about simplifying your game. Hey, I'm a defenseman. I'm supposed to break up plays, and let's start with that. And it really helped him.
It did. I mean, you talk a lot about simpler, less is more with some players. I think that players can repeat that mantra, but actually committing to it and doing it as the way that they play the game. Sometimes too, a player has to accept that he's not going to be the player that he thought he was going to be when he first came up. And I'll use Robert Haig as an example. Robert Haig was drafted as an offensive-minded defenseman. You go back to the 2013 draft. International Scouting Services ranked him the third best offensive defenseman in that draft class. He was playing already in the Swedish Elite League in SHL, and by 19 he was also already seeing power play time. He came over for the Phantoms, and the thought was he was going to be a power play kind of guy, a breakout pass kind of guy, and it just wasn't working for him. And so he became more of a physical presence, more of a 5-10 foot pass guy. And you say what you will, but they got him to the NHL. They've gotten, and he's had several hundred NHL games now that he might not have had otherwise. I think sometimes a player has to embrace that I have to be a different kind of player, a role player. The ultimate example of it's not a defenseman. One day, go onto Hockey DB and look up Ian LePerrier's junior stats.
Yeah.
And Lappy was, I think, about 150 points one year in the Quebec League.
Yes.
In the old International Hockey League, he was a point per game guy, and he gets to the NHL, and he finds out that, well, that's not going to work here. I have to be another player, and he became a fourth line player for a long 1,000 games in the NHL, and would have been longer if not for the career-ending injury. And that was just embracing a different role, finding your own identity, what works for you. Some players realize sooner than others. Some never realize it. What kind of player can I be effectively at the professional level? There's a development piece in that, but there's also a big mental piece in there. There's embracing, that you might not be the star on the team, but if you can make an NHL career for yourself, then you've had success.
Yeah, it seems like they're doing something very similar with Tuamala now.
Yeah. He might. He was a guy who had, I think it was 8 goals in 8 games in the under 18s for Finland, and so he's a speed guy, and I'm going to be a scorer. And he still has some upside to score too, but he's probably not going to be that 30, 40 goal guy that you watch him in the under 18s, and he's playing the best players in the world, his age group, and he's dominating. That's good chance that's not going to be him.
Yeah.
But if you can find other things that work for him, like Sammy Kapanen. Sammy Kapanen is his mentor. And I'm not saying he's going to play in a couple of All-Star games like Sammy did, but Sammy never put up big scoring numbers. He had some 20 goal years, mid-20s, but really he just did everything well. And the way he competed, his element of speed, when. I'm not saying you're going to be able to move 2 miles to the blue line when you need to do that.
Yeah,
too.
right.
but just modeling being able to be a guy who can step in and do whatever it is you need from him. You need players like that, and and obviously the element of speed, as we were touching on at the top, is crucial to that. So hopefully that message sinks in with a lot of these young players, and then you have a good group.
Yeah, definitely. They have to adapt, and that's part of what we're talking about here. But I mean, looking at the veteran rosters, a lot of jobs look like they're set. Yeah. I mean, maybe just off the top of my head here, and I made a list. If Couturier is with Farabee and Konechny, and Lawton's on your second line, left wing, and Frost is there with Tippett, and then you have Cates, and then you have Atkinson, and maybe that left wing spot is open for Forster. Are they going to put him on the right side? I mean, these are the questions people have. We know the defense is a jumble, but we wonder, and we think that Paling, Delorier, and Hathaway are kind of almost set as a fourth line, but because you never know anything with injuries. But like, what other jobs could be open besides that one spot on the left, or maybe the veteran shifts over to the left side? You know, among those players I mentioned earlier, Forster, Brink, players or Denoyer, it's going to be tough for him.
There is. And you have guys that are on the bubble, right? With Wade Allison, for example, he has had so much trouble staying healthy, but I think there's an NHL player that's there, and there have been stretches when he's been healthy where he's been successful. I'd be disappointed if he came in conceding that he's going to be the 13th forward. He wants to play regularly, so that there's competition in that way. There's just one spot on defense. I think right now Sean Walker will be in your top six, and maybe a guy like Zamula starts the year as a number 7, but that can change within the season. You mentioned Ronnie Attard. It's a good thing, I think, that Andre got permission from his team in Sweden to stay in North America, whether it's in the NHL or the AHL, so you can have a proper evaluation. You don't have to rush him. If he needs a couple months with the Phantoms, that's fine. So it's not all or nothing, not NHL or back to SHL. So there are guys that that can make a statement in that way. There's a competition for the backup goalie. Is it going to be Peterson or Urson? And somewhere in the mix you have Sandstrom too, although I think Sandstrom kind of had his chance last year and really didn't carry the ball when he had that opportunity for the number 2 job. Carter Hart's had some injury history, so you want to see how that depth chart is going to play out, and then inevitably you'll have some guys that come in and you figure they have jobs won, and lo and behold they find themselves on the outside looking in. It's the rare camp you go in that everybody you pencil in, whether it's due to injuries or due to performance, that it works out exactly the way that you figured in the opening lineup, and ends up being exactly what you penciled in. On the flip side of that, too, we're all really hoping that Couturier and Atkinson stay healthy this year. Because of what they can help you with offensively, and B, they're the two-way side of the penalty killing. Because the penalty kill has really struggled the last couple of years. That's an instant upgrade for your PK if those two guys are healthy.
And a lot of it is that they're just playing the right way.
Yeah.
And it was such a young lineup, and you don't want guys to lose their SHIT out there in the midst of what could be an 80, 85-point season. And guys like that are going to come out there, and as Jason talks about, have calming shifts out there. And you're not going to get a lot of them on defense. At least you want them up front, right?
No, exactly. So,
what do you think, John Tortorella, and like the organization in general, like if there's a mission statement for this year, what's the underlying theme for what they're trying to do? Is they don't want to just sell out and go what Chicago did. They're doing it their way. They're trying to build the culture without crushing it too much where they depress their prospects for a draft pick, or they're just going to go for it. And then at some point when they're out, they have 3 or 4 players that might be available who could fetch a first or second round draft pick. There's also that part of it too.
Yeah. Teams are so reluctant trading first round picks anymore. It's funny because a lot of times I think the expectation of first round picks doesn't always match up to the reality. And sometimes a guy could be a later first round pick. Flyers' best first round picks, since the mid '90s have been Gagne and Giroux, and they were both picked 22nd overall, right? And Konechny was taking the latter part of a first round, so I think 24th, something like that. And
Even
Frost
Brian Prop. Yeah.
Well,
I was going to mention Prop. He was like was he in the middle of that?
Middle of the first round. He was setting junior scoring records in the Western League, and he actually went a little after he was projected to go. But yeah, of course, 79 was one of the deepest drafts ever.
Crazy.
And just the amount of talent in that draft was crazy. If you didn't end up with a player, you almost had to try. You almost had to be trying not to find one. That was a draft. Just real quick. You look at two guys that didn't even get picked, two guys who fell through that draft. Dino Ciccarelli, NHL Hall of Famer, 600 goals, and Tim Kerr. And if Timmy had been healthy, if he'd stayed healthy, he'd have been a Hall of Famer. He'd been a Hall of Famer too. So that's about 1,000 goals between those two guys. They didn't get picked, and so they're not even in their ranks of that 79 draft. And that was so many Hall of Famers from that class. But yeah, Proper was like a mid first round guy. But the point being, you can. Just because you're not picking first or second or top five doesn't mean you don't get a player. But I do think sometimes, when a player's drafted, it's always about the potential and you're excited and everybody. Well, what if everything clicks? What if they absolutely maximize their ceiling, or what if they exceed it, right? And then reality hits. Most players, every player has things that they do better than other things, right? So, Scott Lawton's been a good solid NHL player. Scott Lawton's a good example of you did pretty well in the later part of the first round. You didn't hit a home run necessarily, but you got a good long-term NHL player who does a lot of things for a hockey team.
And a bad draft,
Yeah.
That 12 was nothing.
2012 was not one of the best drafts. Absolutely right. But the whole point just being, sometimes it feels more like the draft pick is valued more than the NHL player. Yeah. And ultimately, a lot of times you look back, you'll be happy if he turns out as well as the NHL player who was being shopped. But I do think that if they're not in playoff contention come the trade deadline, and there's not an insignificant chance of that. Because we were talking about the blue line concerns. Can they lower the goals against average? The power play has to improve considerably. All those things. There's a lot that has to go right. Flyers, last year Flyers actually improved by 14 points over the year before that, but they still were not yet in that vicinity of the playoffs. So you asked about Torts and what's the mission for this season. I think for last season it was two things. It was evaluate who could be part of this going forward. They did that. They found the Tippett's and the Cateses and the Yorks, hopefully Frost. So they found some of those guys who could be part of this. And then the other part of it too was the season before that. And I'm not blaming AV. I'm certainly not blaming Mike Yeo either. But the reality of the season before that was not only was the team not very good, but they couldn't handle any adversity whatsoever. No. Once they were down 1-0, you might as well just turn off the game and find out what the final score was going to be. Last season, whatever you could say, good or bad, talent-wise, that team competed. They worked and they were not an easy out, even though the record wasn't great. I don't think they want to lose that this year. I think they want to continue that. And I think the other piece of it too is start to develop more internal leadership in the room. To me, one of the biggest areas that the Flyers came up short in the 2010s was they had their nucleus group, which was Giroux, it was Voracek, it was Simmons, right? This is during the Hexa years. And it was those three players and a few other guys too. Braden Shen for a period of time, etc. But they were a bubble team. They had enough talent to be a bubble team, but not enough around it to go more than that. So they would make the playoffs one year, go out in the first round, miss the playoffs the next year, make the playoffs the year after that, go out in the first round. And that's kind of the fate when you're on the bubble. What they were not able to execute other than with Couturier was succession planning. you have to develop a new nucleus. You have to develop new leadership, and within the group that's in the room, and that never really happened. They never really had a new leadership core that emerged. So one thing I really want to see right now, while you still have Couturier, while you still have Atkinson, who can help out, and you still have Lawton, is I want to see new young leaders emerge. I want to see guys who not only take on bigger roles on the ice, but can be those guys who when the team maybe needs a kick in the butt, or they simply need, when things get chaotic and you need somebody to restore some order. I want to see some younger guys become those players that help calm things down and maintain equilibrium, like Kimmo Timonen did in the blue line for so many years. Mentioned Captain. He was one of those guys who brought that leadership piece, whatever his stats were. I think you can't get too high or too low. And a lot of times the young players, they just kind of go with the flow. And I think it still is. I think that Tippett and Frost are good examples of players who, when they're going well, they go really well. But when things are going bad for the team as a whole, maybe they disappear a little bit still. I think that's been a criticism of Morgan that I do think is a fair one. And I've seen the times with Tip and other guys too. I want to see these guys be the guys who can be game changers, tone setters. And that I think is one of the things that I think Torts wants to push push that group towards having some players who emerge as leaders. And remember, this year too, there's not going to be, for the second straight year, that no one's going to wear the C. I think that speaks clearly that he wants to see leaders emerge.
Right. I mean, it makes perfect sense, because by the time you're going to have Gauthier here and Michcov as regular contributors, you want that kind of instilled and installed in the team. You want it to ingrained in their culture, so that you can have the proper path for them to walk in game situations where things aren't going their way. Yeah. Now, in here, like for years, the Flyers, there was an expectation. There was as they used John Twitterell's word, a standard. And we didn't have issues with that. I mean, with Keenan reemerged, that kind of work ethic from the Flyer Cup years, that kind of, he had a different take on it. It was a little bit of a drill sergeant with it. But there was no doubt that these players held together. They believed in themselves, and they were going to meet a certain par or else. And I think I can see that the Flyers are trying to do the same thing right now.
No, I think well said. I think you hit on the head.
Yeah. Chef?
So my assessment of what I think this season's going to be, I think it's going to be similar to last year. I think they're going to be in games that they're going to lose pulling a goal, pulling the goaltender or same kind of fashion as last year. I expect them to be a little bit more competitive for a longer time. And I guess my expectation, since we're talking about that whole group of leadership, I agree with that it probably shouldn't be a captain, but do you think that there's going to be has anybody on this team established themselves in the locker room, I guess, as maybe another A or to wear another letter on the team?
I don't think so. Not yet.
Okay.
There's different ways of showing leadership. There's leadership by example. You don't have to be the most vocal guy. Owen Tippett is not going to suddenly become the guy who's going to stand up in the locker room and play the bad cop when he has to. But it's just going out with a certain mentality. It's if you're going down tonight, it's you're going to do everything you can do to make sure that doesn't happen. I think the most respected guy in the room. Now, Couturier is highly respected too, and Atkinson is as well. But I think especially last year, who's the most respected guy in this room among his teammates? I think it was still Lawton. I think it still is Scott Lawton. They're taking. I think that a lot of the young players, there are ways that Lawton prepares himself, the way he competes, they can continue to emulate. The way that when there's a young player, a new player who comes in, the first guy who takes him under his wing. Just simply in terms of making him feel like he's part of the group, right? Includes him in everything. That's Scotty. Scott Lawton is that guy. I would like to see, and a lot of these young players, they were all came up through the organization together too. The Farabys and the Frosts and those guys. And we didn't even mention Farabee in this, but Farabee's a guy who could really use a bounce back year this year, and quietly a very important player on this hockey team, and would go a long way towards, helping the team take that next step forward too. But just as a group of players that came into the system together or at about the same time and have kind of grown up together, they're now getting to their mid-20s. It's time to take the kid gloves off of some of these guys, and they really have to take those next steps as to being, not just players you go, okay, this guy is an NHL player now, but this is also a player who can help drive the team as a whole, who can help the team take to a higher level and be one of those guys who, when you have those nights when it's not going your way, could be a guy who can help step up and turn it around. Can they do it all the time? No, they can't. But just taking that next step as emerging as part of a leadership core, I don't think they finished at that point even last year. Just more baby steps. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good goal for the season.
It's funny that you said that about taking players under a wing. They were really getting the ultimate show with that with Briere, aren't they? Because he took Giroux under his wing, right? Lived with him and all that. And so if you're looking for leadership, even all the way up the ladder with everybody that's above, you don't have to look very far to see that these guys are asking them to preach what they practiced.
No, for sure. Those are guys who get it, right? They understand the team dynamic as well as what is to be a Flyer. And Couturier could attest to it to the young guys on the team too, because Couturier also lived with Briere when Coots was a rookie.
But yeah, I get the idea, the example, but especially a young guy in town, like I got to pay my bills. What do I do? I never had to do this before. It's simple stuff, So this is. It's not going to be exciting in terms of, wow, they're going to the playoffs and all that. But what will be exciting to see if these guys can take another step and to see if some of these other kids I mentioned earlier can break through. And that's the big thing. There's so much discussion because it's rookie camp. So we're going to talk about the rookies. But the chances of one of those kids, like Foster, Denoyer, Brink, I really don't see anything happening outside of Andre or Jennings or Adder. Those are the guys, if anybody's going to fall down or we're going to have an injury, this is probably the pool of players that might be able to step in. But that's about it, unless it's a trade or something. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of times what you end up seeing, and not just in hockey, is maybe the young player plays a smaller role at the beginning, and it's quite often an injury that gives them that opportunity to see some extended time. And that's a lot of times where you see the players start to take off. And again, sometimes it happens just by necessity during the course of a season. It's funny. We put so much into the preseason, into the exhibition games, even early in the season. Early in the season shapes a lot of perceptions as to the kind of season the player had, because those are the first impressions, and first impressions are the longest lasting ones. Last year, remember Cam York was sent back to the Phantoms out of camp. He already had too many games in the NHL by a couple, like 33 games or something like that. So he didn't even qualify as an NHL rookie anymore. But he started last year back in the American League, and that's he had a bad camp, end of the world, but he ended up having a pretty good year by the end of it. I think a lot of times we put so much into early season and preseason that I think it just helps to take a step back and realize it's a long season, and it's not a football season. If you have a couple weeks that aren't clicking, just like in baseball, the best hitters go into slumps sometimes. I think that let's say we come out and we're 10 games in and Tippett has 2 goals and an assist, whatever the case might be. Doesn't mean he's doomed to have a bad season. Just means off to a little bit of a slow start. And it can be the other way around too. Flyers had a really good October last year. It was November where they fell down last year. November and February were killed the season last year. So I think that whether it's individual players or the team, take a step back, take a deep breath, and take a big picture perspective, because it's a long season and it's a step in a rebuild. It's one season in a multi-year rebuild. So you hope that most of your objectives and the next steps of the rebuild, and hope you can meet what you'd like to see this year. What you don't see, you have to have the honesty to adjust on the fly as you need to. But just take the big picture.
Exactly. And we've been asking for this for a long time. So we have it. So we have to show the patience and maturity that we expect out of the organization. The fans have to give back a little bit. So if they finally have the people in place, we hope, and that things will work out the way it's planned. Just a couple quick hitters from me before we let you go. I'm so appreciative of your time, Bill. Any comments on Matvei Michcov finally getting out of jail with SCA and going to Sochi, where I believe he's got 3 points in 3 games and is generating a whole bunch of plays, tons of shots and chances for that new KHL team, like he was there last year.
Yeah, and that to me was Brent Flair addressed it actually earlier today, and saying that Matvei was getting a little bit frustrated not playing for SCA. We could talk forever about the politics and personalities that are involved here. I'm not going to delve into that in this discussion, but listen, Michcov has been a prodigy for. He was 15 years old, 16 years old. What he did at age 16 at the under 18s was crazy. There's no doubt he has superstar upside. You have to get to that point. But last year when he was lent to Sochi, he had 20 points, I think, in 26 or 27 games. Clearly, he's a KHL player. This whole he hadn't earned the ice time thing was baloney. And it was after a pretty good preseason, too. A preseason where they had him playing center for the first time in his career, and he was handling it. I mean, he didn't look out of place playing the hardest position a forward can play. And, he didn't – a lot of times the guy might look over his head or, perfect? No, of course not. No player is perfect, especially not a young teenage player. But I thought, ultimately, long term, he can play center as well as wing. That opens all kinds of doors for him and for the Flyers organization and whatnot. So to come into the season and go, he hasn't earned the time, and no, that simply was not true. And I don't blame him for being frustrated. Sochi is not one of the better teams in the KHL, although their record is better than SCA's, I might say.
They're doing well so far.
SCA's been a little bit of a losing streak early on here, but he's there with a coach who will give him the ice time that he needs. He'll be out on the power play. That's really, really ultimately what you want till he comes over. His contract with SCA runs for 2 more years after this one. I want to clarify something that some have said. Michkov's contract, it was a 5-year deal that he signed when he was 16 years old. He was locked into a 5-year contract at 16. It wasn't like he signed a 3-year extension because they knew what they had. They knew they had a prodigy. So that's so it wasn't like he never wanted to come over. His objective is to play in the NHL. When that will be, we'll see. I don't think it'll be more than the remainder of his contract. You can see that his goal is to come and play over here. But now he'll have plenty of opportunity, plenty of ice time. Even the one game he didn't get on the score sheet so far for Sochi, he had 10 shots on goal in that game. So just played a little bit of bad luck. I mean, the KHL is not a high-scoring league, and it's not a league where teenage players typically excel. So, I think he's everything that he's cracked up to be. And it just takes time and takes patience.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice little Forsberg type move today. Yes. Taking contact, bumping, actually
the reverse hit play. And then
reverse hit, right.
Yeah.
Right. Really, really nice. Just two others. Any comment on the Babcock situation? It's kind of a shame in some respects, but I think maybe there was a little bit too much risk for the reward for Columbus in the first place. Is that too facile a conclusion, or did you feel that way going in yourself?
Well, Babcock wasn't going to come in with a lot of rope, right? And I'm trying, since this story is broken, and obviously, right, he's already resigned. It's funny. They're already over unders as to how long Babcock would last as Columbus coach. I don't think anybody had the under on this one. I don't think anybody had. He's not going to coach a single game. But
under camp, I had it.
That blew a lot of pools, a lot of unders.
Nobody had that kind of an under. But I think it shows how much coaching has changed. But on the flip side too, there are other ways. There are other ways he could have accomplished getting to know his players. Right, go out for a team lunch, sit down and talk to the guys. Right. Pick one photo on your cell phone, right? And we'll, I think a big part of it is the control, right? You had to give up your cell phone, and he gets to scroll through your pictures. And I think that it's the control aspect. I think more than anything else, for a coach that's kind of known as a very controlling, almost control freak kind of a coach, that's not the foot you want to get off on, right? So that's really my reaction to it. There's probably some specifics in there we don't know and we'll never know. And in general, I'm a believer in that what happens behind closed doors, unless it's egregious, ought to stay there. But clearly enough players were upset enough about this that they turned over their coach in record time here. I am wondering, considering this is a critical year for Columbus, the job security of Jarmo Kekalainen, who I really like, but if Columbus misses the playoffs this year, Jarmo's out, right? And the whole Babcock thing, not the way you want to start camp in a year where you're kind of on the hot seat, and John Davidson, his team president too. JD could end up being on the hot seat this year too. So there's a lot of pressure on that whole group.
Yeah, I forget who I was listening to, where I don't know if it was your podcast or somebody else talked about how Claude Noel had players use their phone back in the day when he asked each player to go around the room on each day, one player would get notice and just share a couple photos and tell us about yourself with photos. That you presentation, so we just get to know you away from the rink, not just as some unit of a hockey team. Like that's how you do it. They don't grab the nice phone.
Exactly. Where you're physically giving up control of your phone. The coach could in front of the guy scroll it. I want to put this one up. So and listen, again, who knows what you're putting up there? The guys getting together and doing beer pong, for example, right?
Right.
Or whatever the case might be, the coach has the control in that case. It's like, well, I wouldn't like a boss or a stranger, somebody still a stranger to you or anybody coming in and taking control of your phone. It doesn't even matter what's on it. Again, it's a matter of that it's your privacy. So I get it. I get why the reaction has been what it's been.
Yeah. Last one, Bill. It seems like the Shane Pinto has a possibility to the Flyers from Ottawa as they're going through a contract situation with him. Seems like those rumors have died down. But what I wanted you to comment on is how encouraging it seems that Danny Briere is kind of like he's monitoring the ticker, if you will, to always find a way and not let any opportunity pass him up. And he might be in some rumors this year where the Flyers are looking for different ways, whether it's to get some kind of asset or a young player like a Pinto, whether you like him or don't like him, whatever the cost might have been. But overall, the overriding message is he's always going to be on the hunt to improve the team, and not just in word, but in deed.
For sure. And you have to go outside the box a little bit sometimes too. One thing that I'd really like to see the Flyers keep working towards is you open up a little bit of cap space where you can be the third team, where you can, that's where you can take on somebody's bad contract and you get a good asset for it. That's where, team has to move a player for a cap reason. And you might be able to get that player. Now, maybe it's not the right hockey trade. And I commented on Pinto specifically. I like him. He's a good young player, two-way upside, and there's a lot to like about him. But, the Flyers have their share of north-south guys, their share of shoot-first guys. I like seeing them develop a few more playmakers. Mm-hmm. But, Pinto, if you get Pinto, then you adjust other things. Maybe you move another piece. You always have to be willing to, don't get so tied in to the group that you have. And sometimes you have to adjust. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's all from me, Chef. If you had anything,
one last question, because I guess you with the three top guys now. You got Jones, Torts, and Briere. With what's here now as that triad, that trio, and you see Danny, like Isaiah said, putting out feelers and talking to a lot of people. And obviously with Jones's connections, it seems like there are more people are interested in Philly again. For a while there, we kind of felt like we were like on the island by ourselves and we couldn't draw a free agent without overpaying or a lot of money. And then their heart didn't seem to be right there, So I guess my question would be, it seems like Jones and Briere were probably the great hires for the simple reason that you're making Philly a destination again. Would that be a good assumption?
Sure, they've taken the first steps towards that. There's so many things that go into why a player wants to come to a certain team. Obviously, number one is the opportunity to win, right? But B, also it's feedback from the guys on that team. What's it like living around there, right? Players with young families or whatever. What's the ownership like? What do they like to deal with? Do they have the commitment? If you have whatever you might need, how is it like to interact with ownership? And with Briere and with Jones, they have an enthusiasm, but it's also a genuine enthusiasm, and it's also a very Flyers specific enthusiasm. Like they understand the fan base, they understand the culture, and they also understand what it was like to play here when the team was winning and those expectations were high, and what that atmosphere was like. Ask Danny about the 2010 playoffs, right? Or even 2012, that series against the Devils. It was electric, and Jonesy saw that from the playing side than from the broadcast side. So they know what it's been like, and what it's like here when there are expectations to win. You can look at the other teams in the city. It was there were a number of years where interest in the Phillies was very low, and then now interest is sky high. Whether the Phillies can get back to the World Series or they don't get as far in the playoffs this year, it is fun to go to Citizens Bank Park and watch the Phillies play. The Flyers are working towards getting back to that. You can see what the Eagles have done too, obviously. But I think that being part of a multi-sport city, a sports crazy city, and an organization that little things, and not that putting two logos back on the ice is a big gesture, but it's an understanding of a piece of team culture, something that set the Flyers apart from other teams. From really, at one point, every other team in the NHL, they were the last team to get rid of the double logos. That had it at any point. So I think that I think that enthusiasm is contagious, but ultimately you need to start winning too. Whether it would be fantastic, it'd be unbelievable if that was this year, but if that's not this year, it's the year after that. You want to feel like you're moving towards something, and hopefully in the relatively near future, you can get back to where. We're not talking about a rebuild anymore. Then we're talking about how far, how do you put those pieces in place to be able to make deep runs and to be able to have a window of years where you can push towards that. Obviously, there's a lot of work between now and then. But I think a lot of the early things that have been done the right way. So we'll see.
Bill, fantastic. I really appreciate you doing this. Remind people again where people can find you on social media and the projects that you're involved in right now.
So weird not calling it Twitter, on X/Twitter.
X, right? Yeah.
At Bill Meltzer, all is one word. You can find me basically every single day on PhiladelphiaFlyers.com. I also run the @Flyers alumni social media, and there's a lot of exciting stuff coming up with the alumni this year. We didn't even touch on Mark Recchi's Hall of Fame induction,
right.
and then Sam Carchidi already spilled the beans on this other one, but there's going to be a 50th reunion of the Flyers Cup teams. Probably the last time that whole group will be together. So that's pretty exciting coming up this year.
Yeah. I was 14 when that happened. So,
yeah.
Oh, that went by fast. Bill, thanks again. Hope we do this again soon.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
My pleasure, guys. Anytime.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
There you go. Chef, lots of information there. I think we're ready for that first exhibition game against the Devils a week from tonight. When we're recording this on Monday night, they'll be in New Jersey at the Meadowlands, and they will also be at the Wells Fargo Center with their against the Devils as well on Saturday. That Saturday, that would be the 30th. So, brother, we covered a lot of territory. I didn't get Mark Recchi going into the Flyers Hall of Fame January 27th versus the Bruins. So that's coming up, and the way everything flies by anymore.
Now that we mentioned that real fast, that's kind of who like Emil Andre's build reminds me of. He's like a wrecking ball just like him. He's got low center of gravity like Recchi was. So,
Or Chemo. Chemo's the first name.
Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Scandinavian defenseman. Yeah. So, Recchi played for a long time, had some great seasons, and scored a lot in multiple eras because he was played that long. His career was 20 years he played? Mark Recchi?
18? Hold up. I'm checking now, but yeah.
Yeah. You want to check Apple on that one because they thought he was done, and then he had a couple rebound years. Because I know he helped the Canes in 2006. He was part of the veteran crew that was brought in. Corey Stillman was brought in, Mark Recchi. Yeah. They got everybody under the sun that year to put him over the top.
Yeah. He played all the way up to 2011. Wow.
Yeah. So how many years was that?
Oh, God. You're asking me to do math now? 89 to 2011. So, I guess about 20 years. Close to it anyway. Yeah.
So, because he played with Pittsburgh, and he got a couple of cups with Mario Lemieux. And, was he on? Yeah, he was on the 90 and 91. That was the Penguins cups with Mario. And then he won a cup with Carolina, which was a trade acquisition in 2006. He won the cup again in 2011 with the Bruins. So, he played a long time, 2011. Yep. Then he started out in 1989. He played 15 games with the Penguins, 88, 89. And then he was a regular in that first cup season back in 89, 90 for the Penguins. So there you go. Oh. So, we got the double logos. We got Fedotov. I don't know. I can talk about Fedotov.
But there's nothing new. So
there's nothing new. He'll play. They don't care. And then HF is we're going to come with a judgment on this. So it doesn't sound very threatening. And frankly, he's probably never going to be a Flyer. And we have so much. I mean, with the players Kolosov and Ursan right now behind Hart, we're in pretty good shape. And then we've drafted another Russian guy after Bjarnason. They like the Zavragin guy who's being coached by Nikolai Habibulin, the Bulin Wall, who played in Winnipeg forever, the first go around with the Jets, and then he won a cup with the Tampa Bay. Mm-hmm. The year the Flyers came close in 2004. That was another great Flyers team that just didn't have quite enough. So I think we're going to leave it there.
Yep.
I guess we're looking forward to a week from tonight when the Flyers open the preseason versus the Devils in New Jersey, like I mentioned. Chef, you get the final word.
Well, no, you know what? Like Bill said, it's this year is going to be very interesting, but I think it's going to be. Me personally, I think it's going to be fun. I think there's a lot to look forward to, and I know he said it before, and Dan had asked, and I'll just reiterate: you can have this team grow and get better as a team and better as a group, and still have them lose. You're looking for individual growth, how they respond to each other, because in all, we're building a team at this point. The individual stuff is not going to be as relevant as building that team chemistry, I think. So, and you can argue that fact with me on X, Chef to Let Be on X. Ooh.
Here you go.
Sounds funny. Sounds like I'm like, thank God I didn't give my old email. It was a Buff Chef. It would have been, that on X, that would have been like crazy. That would have been like, oh yeah, it's going back to my stripper days, right?
right. Yeah. It's quite a vision. Yeah. So I can't call it X yet. I mean, X is like, I dip my hands in something undesirable, but yeah, you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck at O&B Puck. You can follow me if you wish to, Isaiah, ISAIAH _520. Isaiah, don't forget the _520. And I tweet about a lot of stuff other than sports. I like talking about music more and more. Maybe I'll do a podcast on music one of these days. I got to call Russ Cohen up and say he wants to do another podcast on music. I know he did something for a while, but we're on 12 podcast platforms at least with the O&B Puckcast. If you could rate and subscribe, particularly with the Apple Podcast, if you could give us a follow, rating, a subscription on those platforms, it would really help us out. It moves us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts. It really helps us out. So just a quick recap: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible, Google. We have a YouTube page. Just plug in there, O&B Puckcast. And of course, we have a Facebook page as well. And we're also on Getter at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. Just a backup in case everything blows up on X or Twitter. So until next time, everybody, take care.